Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 44 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. This is one of our corporate blogs. We've got Chris Feeney on with me. Chris, how's it going?
Going great, man. I hope you are doing well. Spring has arrived.
Yeah,
So that's the warmer weather.
I'm traveling again, so sorry about the background noise. I'll go on mute as much as possible as you talk through your blog. I'm back in Orlando. I guess we were here last week with HIMSS.
Yeah, literally as soon as I saw your background come up on the Zoom call, I was like, I think that's Orlando because I recognize those levels of the Sheraton Hotel or wherever that is in the airport. But
yeah, this is I think my fourth week in a row of somehow ending up in Orlando for at least a day or two before heading home or heading somewhere else. So it's a good time of year to be here, I guess. Everything is happening in this area, and then summer will happen and things will be happening other places.
yeah, my impression was it was spring break. So last week we had both spring break and HIMSS going on, but the airport was absolutely jam-packed. I mean, not as full as I've seen it in years past, but it was pretty full. I'd say people are out and about again. So that's a good sign.
It was good to see the crowd at HIMSS. From your perspective, was it half vendors and half participants? Did you think it was kind of that breakdown, or was it? It was definitely better than it was 6 months ago in Las Vegas on the participation side.
Yeah, I would agree. I've done probably, estimating 13 to 15 HIMSS over the years, something like that. It's a lot. And so compared to last year's in Vegas, definitely bigger. When I was flying down last Sunday, the guy sitting next to me actually worked for HIMSS, and he said that they were looking at 25 to 30,000. I don't know if that was what it ended up as, but I was mainly in the booth. I didn't really get around to what was going on in the sessions and stuff. But I say we had some good traffic. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I was conservative in terms of who I was scanning because we had other people scanning for people that came by, and the ones that I did scan, I felt were pretty good opportunities to further the conversation. So
let's do this. Your blog is about HIMSS and what you guys are showing off in terms of the. Well, let me just read it. So, further enhancing clinical workflows with IGEL, Imprivata, and Citrix, which I know you have been around a long time, and that is the holy grail in the healthcare space, is getting better workflows, more timely workflows, and getting physicians and other medical professionals not wasting their time getting in and out of applications and technology, but actually doing their job and using the technology to improve their job. What caused you to write the latest version of this blog?
So that's a great question. It's in the story actually for me goes back probably a decade, if not a little bit more than that. It was when, as an SE in the field with Imprivata at the time, for the first few years that we started getting into healthcare, I really wasn't seeing Epic specifically in my patch. And then after 2008, when they had the market crash and they put in this new act, I can't remember all the names of it, but it really pushed the healthcare organizations to incentivize them to get over to the electronic medical record. Not that they weren't before, but to really, fast track that. And so we began to rapidly see them move ahead. And so the first customer that really I came across this specific workflow we call Persistent App, which I'll talk about in a second, was actually here locally in Raleigh. And they were deploying Epic for the first time after they had been a best of breed shop of all these different things. And then they were consolidating on this one thing. Well, the workflow in that situation is, to get in and out of that application rather quickly. They would walk up on a Windows machine, they'd tap their badge, authenticate, and Epic would either already be up and running and they would just get logged right in. And then they could, tap out and the next user could come, badge in, and it would just be a user switching very quickly in and out of the application. All that's well and good. And then a week before go live, roughly, they said, hey, we have to get to other applications on Citrix that are not tied to just the shared kiosk machine here. And that's generally a generic account. It's not Chris Feeney's, user that's logged in to set up that Citrix session with Epic. It's generic workstation 1, whatever. And then you're like, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to get their applications if a Citrix session is already established under this shared workstation account? And it was a mystery, but the customer said, hey, I came across this API thing with Citrix. I wonder if that could be used. Thankfully, in those early years, I had a developer with me on site, and we looked at it and we were able to actually get it working. And we didn't have to pause the go live. And so what I thought was initially a one-off, later on, it kept coming up in more and more accounts. Got to about 10 to 12, and we had this scripted solution that that really kind of solved this problem. And so that's kind of where it started for me. It was really kind of getting a true understanding of what would really fully enhance the customer. Make sure that the EMR stays up. Their other stuff does not stay up, and it gets disconnected cleanly, and so the next user has a clean workspace to use. So that's kind of how it started.
So Chris, was that a matter of getting the user logged into the local operating system and then passing that through into the remoting app and the remoting session? I mean, so you walked into that with the idea, okay, we're gonna use Imprivata, we're gonna use this single identity, single sign-on with enabled through a smart card reader or something, and that's going to get them into the OS. And then now we need to pass that through to the presentation session.
So this was really in healthcare. A lot of the workstations are set up as shared kiosks, meaning that the user, John Smith, for example, is not actually logging into the Microsoft OS. It's already logged in under a generic workstation ID, usually workstation 1, and that's and then the Imprivata would have what they call their shared workstation agent would then lock the machine, and then they would be asked to identify themselves, and that's where they would walk up and tap their badge, for example, to make it easier to log in versus password. Now that you have identity, then you can say, all right, well, John just logged in. What do I do with that information? And that's where using single sign-on, passing that information through that session, that Citrix session for Epic in this case, and then that gets taken by the API mechanisms and just logs the user right in very seamlessly. And then if they need to get to other applications that they might need to check, some other web app or some other application, maybe it's installed locally, maybe it's all through Citrix, whatever, you have that functionality where you can still allow them to get to the EMR and other things. Could be a virtual desktop, it could be published apps, doesn't really matter. And endpoint until now. So that's why I'm very excited that we got it to market at this past week. So
Chris, one of us may be having network connect. I assume it's me because I'm in this lounge, but I've got a ping test running in the background. I'm not dropping any packets or getting any delays. So we go back and listen. We may find in the recording there's a little gap here. So hopefully that doesn't persist. But so prior to the healthcare initiatives in the Citrix world, I think people were just solving that by using anonymous logins. They would get into the application, and then from within there, maybe they logged into the application further, or maybe just everybody shared the credentials. When the government got involved and said, "Hey, that's not gonna cut it," that's when the need to have specific user logins into the presentation session and into the application became very relevant, right?
Yeah, it's a great point, because a lot of what was going on too is, especially going into some of these healthcare settings, they were sharing credentials. It was, nurse would log in as doctor, not because they were trying to be nefarious. It was more just convenience. It's always been the marriage between security and convenience. But what came down as a result of this incentive by the government to move rapidly to adopt your EMR, also came enforcement of security requirements, such as individual usernames and passwords. Well, Imprivata was in a really good position there because they already were solving that issue. And so they had a solution to help with that. And then that kind of ended up working very well in a healthcare setting, because they had many passwords to deal with. They had a lot of need to get in and out rather quickly. So these and a lot of that was applications often very much delivered by Citrix, for example. And so you began to see up on the screen here, if you're watching this is from last year's HIMSS when we kind of introduced this concept. What you have here is a common machine, right? That's a shared workstation. It could be a WOW cart, like you see in the video, or it could be a machine inside of a patient room, or outside in the hallway on the wall. I've seen those kind of concepts, or in just a little a nurse's working station, or whatever a doctor's, but it's basically any machine where multiple people could come and go at any given time and use the machine. It's not tied to, me sitting down at my desk in the office and nobody else comes in during the day. When I'm done, I leave.
So Chris, if I'm looking at the demo now, I'm looking at a system that's got a screen up, and then it's got what I guess are Imprivata prompts. So at that point, is the local IGEL operating system, is it logged into at this point with some kind of credentials, or just anonymous? And then now we're relying on the Imprivata application to take us to the next step?
Yeah, so you've got IGEL's booted up, and behind this login screen, very similar to a Windows machine in a shared kiosk mode, is basically this application, Epic in this case, that's ready for somebody to log in, and then they can just take those credentials and log them in. So, but you have to first establish yourself. Who are you? And that's what you see here on the screen.
Okay, so you said booted up. I think what you really mean, right, is booted up and it's logged into the operating system, right?
Correct.
And when you say Epic's in the background, that means a session is actually running there in the background. It's connected to. You're just going to now inject who you are into that session.
Correct. So we've what we've done is, behind the scenes on the IGEL side, we've started a Citrix session under a generic account. So this case, let's take its this HIMSS demo station 1, whatever the endpoint name is, which is an Active Directory account with a password of whatever kind. And that's what we use to start the Citrix session for Epic, the persistent app that's going to stay connected to this machine. So you'll see this doctor log in here, and there's the application already ready to go. And very quickly, we log them right in. And so they did not have to do anything but just tap their badge. And so the application's up. They can do what they need to do. And what's really cool is, if this is in an outpatient setting, where they do a lot of, the nurse, somebody comes in, preps the chart, and then the doctor comes in, and instead of having to navigate when they log in, where'd that chart go? Epic has a feature called Secure, and you could either tap your badge to, and basically, instead of logging out of Epic, it secures Epic. And then when the next user comes in, or the same user, they're basically right where they left off. So if I'm looking at your chart, or maybe your child's chart, whatever, and I have to step away for a second, I come in. As soon as I log back in, I'm still looking at your chart, and I don't have to navigate through the application to figure out where is that chart. It's right there. And so that is extremely powerful. It's very fast. And so what this does is allow for that functionality in various settings. So, and we're basically taking what was a very popular workflow in a Windows world, and now we brought it to IGEL OS.
I guess there's a couple things happening, right? Number one, a lot of technology where the EMR in this case has gotten smarter, where IGEL is getting smarter in Imprivata in order to get that information to the application session. IGEL's gotten smarter, and now we have the application running in the background, but not actually and connected even, just not actually with the actual user until the moment of here you go. Here's the user that's coming in. Here's the user that's going out. And then so the application of the OS and the Citrix agent and the IGEL use of the agent is smarter. And I guess one of the other things that you mentioned earlier, which I think is probably really important, is that the organization has to standardize on EMR so that they're not just using the best of breed for every single process in the hospital, because chasing this across all those different applications would be nearly impossible.
Yeah, and that's just for those that have been in healthcare for a long time. That's the trend that I began to see is they would standardize on Cerner, they would standardize on Epic, for example, but then slowly but surely anything that they were using for maybe best of breed, the module for that new EMR would replace it, and they would begin to add more functionality, and therefore those older applications would basically be deprecated, and everything would more or less be accessible from one application. So as we continue the video, what the other thing here is very important on a shared kiosk is, what if I need to get to other stuff besides this generically logged in Citrix session for Epic? I want to check my email. I want to get to a virtual desktop. And so as the video is playing, I launched a virtual desktop, and that's tied to me, the user that badged in. And so that's coming up. I'm getting logged in. And then what's also really cool is you can kind of continue to automate some of the steps the user might necessarily take. And if you're watching the video in the blog, you'll see that all I did was tap my badge, it launched, or clicked to launch the virtual desktop. As the virtual desktop's coming up, we're auto launching another application for the user, and then single sign-on logs them in. So the user has physically never touched the keyboard at all. All they did is walk up, tap their badge, they're in. And then they click a mouse and they're into this other workspace. So you can kind of see that playing out. And so all of that is Citrix delivering the workspace and the applications inside of that. Single sign-on from Imprivata in this case, logging the user in, taking away the need to type in passwords and stuff, and just making it much more seamless.
So Chris, you like in the Epic example, you didn't have an icon for the Citrix Workspace app or any of the desktops, but because of the configurability of IGEL, you were able to put the start area, the app launcher, down in the corner. And if the user was trained, they would know, oh, if I need other things, I can go down here, it'll all be waiting.
Right. There'll be some training, of course, for this, but that's correct. Anything that they're entitled to, they could just access it from the start menu there. Now, some would say, what about shortcuts on the desktop? We've heard that request. We're entertaining it, trying to figure out how we would want to do that. But as far as initial functionality, it's there for the taking. It's actually building on a feature that Imprivata brought to IGEL, in this case Linux OS, a few years ago. It was actually Citrix, my first Citrix Synergy, which was 2018. They had just delivered published applications. So now this is basically published application support on steroids for healthcare specifically. So, this there's a little diagram in the blog there that kind of walks you through sort of how does this all come about. We won't necessarily go through each one of those steps, but
we can. We can. I'd actually like to some degree.
Yeah.
But before, I think I'm still lost on, and maybe I just missed it, but what exactly is a persistent app and why it's important? That's one of your titles here in the blog. So
yeah.
Can you cover that?
Yeah. So persistent would be, in the example here, an application that is tied to and needs to be up and running or remaining hot, if you will, to the shared workstation, so that when a user walks up and authenticates, especially if it's delivered virtually, which in this case it is, it doesn't have to get disconnected, closed, fired back up. All that takes time, and time is money, and time is very precious. So that persistent app remains connected, as you saw in the video, and so we're basically keeping it hot. And it's, in this case, just one app. It's not 5 apps. It's just one. And that's really the main key one, which in this case is that EMR. Does that help?
It does. Is that the feature Citrix came out with a bunch of years ago, or is that something Imprivata is specifically doing in addition to Citrix to keep that app, at the ready? It's hot, it's connected, it's just not, the user's not passed through to it. The actual user for the application, but the Citrix session has a live session.
It's kind of a combo. I would say more specifically on the latter side with Imprivata taking advantage of functionality that Citrix could provide, where it could start up an application and have it ready to go. But that's great. But if you don't want to have to type in usernames and passwords all the time, how do you do that in a world where you can just walk up and tap a badge and also users coming and going? There's a security aspect there, but you have to marry it with the convenience factor. So Imprivata brought a lot of that functionality as well. And so that's what we've kind of delivered here. So I need to get you a better picture of that. Unfortunately, it's kind of blurry, but let's walk through this step by step. So
it starts with step 0.
Yep. So you obviously have an IGEL operating system on a thin client. And Imprivata has their software. They call it Prove ID Embedded Agent. So that has to be installed onto the device, and then you set up the policies for the workflow. So that's step number 1. You get that going, and then that kind of leads in, or step 0. Sorry.
Also, real quick, when you say installed, is this part of the IGEL operating system? Is it a custom partition? How do you get it on there?
All great questions. So it is not part of the IGEL OS. The Pi agent is on the appliance, the Imprivata appliance. And so what is part of IGEL is there's a setting to point to the appliance, and that's we call that a bootstrap. And then it just basically, you click on it, set it up, and then it connects to the appliance. And then once that is established, it downloads the Pi agent and installs it. And then, of course, you have a policy that says, how am I supposed to behave? And in this case, we say, well, just install. And then when it's there, put a login screen up on, and that's what you see in the step number 1.
So as an IGEL guy, I'm actually kind of confused by it. So I'm not used to anything installing on IGEL. I'm used to laying down a partition or it being part of the layers of the operating system. So when you say the Imprivata appliance, there's an appliance living on your network, and you point your IGEL device to it, and it downloads and installs it every time it boots up, or it does it one time and it remains persistent?
The agent, once it's installed, it remains. But what's really cool is the way that it was designed by Imprivata. It was that if, let's say you got an upgrade to your Imprivata environment, which includes a new version of the Pi agent, that agent can be installed when the device is idle. It doesn't require a reboot. So it can, say you go into the next version. If it's available, it'll download it and just update that agent without a reboot in a lot of cases. But you have to have something there to identify the user, and that's what that is. So
my IGEL OS is up. It's booted. It's logged into locally or domain. I guess either one's fine, right?
There is no local login on the IGEL. We really technically, as an OS, we have 2 accounts, user and root. So there's no local login to a domain. It's not attached to the domain, never needs to be attached to the domain. The equivalent would be a Windows machine that is not attached to the domain, just a local boot up, whatever. And there you have a local machine with no domain information.
Okay, so it boots up, and then it's going to just start right into the UI as some type of generalized user, local user, right?
Right, and then you see this login screen, and at that point you're ready to have a user walk up and authenticate.
So there has to be something technical to happen there, right? So this thing's going to boot up, and somewhere in that process, there's the agent must start running, and the user then walks up and sees the screen with I didn't really catch it in the video, but there's a box on the left and a box on the right.
Yeah, they're basically tiles. One is username and password login. The other one is tap your badge. Mm-hmm. If you plugged in a fingerprint reader, you'd see lay your finger down. It's very similar. So
so you don't have to have a badge. If you didn't have a badge, you could use your name and password. Ultimate result would be the same.
Correct.
All right.
So now that we've got the login occurring, user walks up, user number one, and authenticates, taps their badge. And usually at the beginning of the day, they're going to be prompted for a second factor, type in your password or PIN. Behind the scenes, what we, from a Citrix licensing perspective, this is what I think you'll find interesting, right? If you have a Citrix session always up and running, it's going to take up a license, full stop. So if that unit, let's say it's a maternity ward that was not very busy, and then a full moon comes out or the snowstorm hits, and all of a sudden, we got babies being born. Believe me, it's happened twice for me. So, sorry, just throw that out there. It's true. Anyways, so they have to spin it up. Right. Well, now we need to make sure that when, the sessions are ready to go. So user starts to log in, and then behind the scenes, the persistent app, in this case, Epic, is fired up for the very first time. Now that it's up and running, user gets logged in, and then it's going to stay up and running as users come and go. And unless the user closes the app or there's a Citrix timeout, usually behind the scenes, like let's say it's been idle for 6 hours or whatever, but behind the scenes, the application is going to be up and running every time a user comes up and logs in.
So at what step, you've got 0, 1, 2, 3, is the actual Citrix connection made and a license used?
Step 2. Okay. So the step in the diagram, I don't like the way they numbered it, but it's that third thing there on the thing. So user 2, user walks up, authenticates, the persistent app is started up, the Citrix session's established, and then the user is logged in. And then we move on to the next phase, which is on the right.
So would the user experience some type of slowdown waiting on the session to connect there, or is it already kind of active in the background, but no license?
Initially they would, the first user would experience, where's Epic, right? Well, it's firing up. Now, as well as I do that how quickly that session could come up depends a lot on the network and a whole bunch of other stuff that is oftentimes out of our control. So, but let's presume that Epic comes up in just a few seconds, and then they get logged in. So that first user might take an initial hit. Let's just say it's less than 10 seconds. Not terrible. But it's up and running now, and now it's going to stay up and running as users come and go. And that's what that persistent is referring to.
Okay, so that user is then going to have a session waiting for them, and it's going to follow them around as they move throughout their day.
So that's another great point. So the persistent app is not going to follow them because it's not tied to John Smith's login or Susie Jones. It is tied to the generically logged in machine that you have here. So that's going to stay on that machine, and it'll just, as users come and go, it'll be there. But if I had launched, as you saw in the video, my virtual desktop, that can follow me because that's tied to me. And so if I walk up, I tap in here and I get to my EMR, and then I said, I want to check my desktop and check my email and stuff. And then I'm like, all right, I'm good. And then I tap out. Behind the scenes, that virtual desktop is getting disconnected, but the Epic application in this case remains connected.
Yeah.
And then
so
if
when I pull up the shortcut for the apps, am I going to tap again to tell the apps who I am, or is it going to use that previous tab as to who I am?
That's a great thing. I love this conversation. So what's going to happen is if I walk back up and I had, let's say I had launched my virtual desktop previously, and I tap back in, and you'll see this in our other HIMSS demo, is my virtual desktop is still disconnected, but it says, hey, Chris just logged back in. Fire that, reconnect him to that virtual desktop, and it comes right up in just a few seconds. So it knows that I'm, authenticating in other places. Let's say I'm at this WOW cart, I badge in, I get into Epic, and then I say, let me check my virtual desktop. It comes up for the first time. I tap out, and then I go upstairs, check on another patient, I badge in. My virtual desktop is going to get reconnected and come right back up.
Yeah, so I think we just talked about a couple of things, right? We have fast user switching, which is in the Epic app going from machine to machine to machine. And then at the same time, you have smooth roaming where you're going from machine to machine, and the whole entire session is going to be connected as as you into that virtual desktop
Yeah, so it's sort of a best of both worlds, if you will.
at the same time.
Yeah, and so that's what, in a Windows world, that's what I ran into in that first situation. I'm like, wait, we've got to solve this problem. How can we do it? And thankfully, Citrix had some functionality built into the receiver at the time, and we basically just leveraged it in a scripted fashion back then. And over the course of time, this particular feature made its way into the Imprivata product. And but just over a year ago, we came across the fact that they had built this for Linux, and Imprivata had. And so we had multiple customers asking for this type of flexibility and functionality because they couldn't upgrade their existing machines, as you know, the IGEL story, to the next version of Windows, or they wanted to maybe save money on a hardware refresh. So by switching from a Windows endpoint where they had this workflow to an IGEL machine, how can I retain that functionality? Or I wasn't able to deliver it before, I want to do it now. That's kind of where this is all going.
Yeah.
Is maintain that functionality and have customers have the ability to switch and keep that. Because if you don't, you got to user train again, and doctors, nurses, they're not going to like that.
Well, you just highlighted another thing that's important here, and that's the adoption of Linux and Citrix evolving their features to be on par with what's in their Windows application. And then in this case, Imprivata making the same functionality available on Linux. That's the other element here, is the vendors really taking on Linux as a first-class citizen endpoint.
You said it, man. It's been a long time coming. I don't think anybody really at least I didn't see necessarily the Linux becoming as popular, but let's face it, and I just kind of point this out in the blog, Linux is a much more secure, at least IGEL Linux for sure, easier to manage, all those things that still play out at the normal IGEL story. But if you're coming to healthcare, if you don't have functionality that meets the workflow needs, it's a losing proposition in a lot of cases, because not everybody's going to need badge in, get to a virtual desktop. There's certainly that's popular.
Yeah.
But if it's just about apps, or apps and desktops, now we've kind of got all the above.
Well, that's interesting, because I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have two major healthcare providers, and every time I go to the doctor, I look over at the screen, and they're still running Windows of some type to access all this. And I think that's just because of the legacy supportability of the various applications. And I bet because of this adoption, at some point I'm going to look around the corner and there's going to be a Linux device sitting there. It kind of has to happen for the configurability, the manageability, and the security of the devices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know this. There's more we could probably talk about here, but being able to allow customers to switch from Windows to another OS, in this case, IGEL Linux, the more functionality and flexibility and workflows that you can provide them that they had before, it hopefully will become a no-brainer. Of course, I want a more secure, easier to manage, and I can repurpose this existing equipment and not hardware refresh. If I need a hardware refresh, like that beautiful LG, all-in-one that we had on the demo, by all means, we've got IGEL ready vendors that have purpose-built devices for healthcare in a lot of cases, and can run IGEL just fine, and also have built-in readers and stuff that Imprivata supports. And so it's a coming together of a lot of technologies for the benefit of the industry.
Well, let's finish our diagram here. So we've got our user, they're using the application. They've got to go out of the room for a second, or they got to go to the next room. They are then going to tap out. Now, if they didn't tap out, there's going to be some timeout at some point that will disconnect that session.
This is, golly, you're teeing everything up for me, man. I love it. So if you can't tell, I'm uber excited. And the reason I'm is because, yes, there's an inactivity timeout. We actually had it on display at HIMSS this past week. We didn't do it for the video that we recorded, but the long and short of it is, on a Windows endpoint, same thing, right? Imprivata had developed an inactivity kind of fade away, sort of walk away security thing. People walk away, I'm still logged into that EMR. Well, that's dangerous. If I walk up and I'm not you, now I have access to stuff that is yours, or I have access to that patient chart, right? Hey, Tiger Woods just checked in. Let me check out his chart. That's happened, and some people got fired for checking on that a few years ago. True story. So there is a walkaway security function that begins to fade and block the screen, and then if nobody comes in, it locks the machine. So that piece does exist, and you can have some flexibility with when that occurs. But let's just say the machine is now locked. Either the user tapped in or tapped out, whatever. So now we're back to the login screen. The next user walks up. They need to get in. They tap their badge. And then the EMR that was previously logged in as user A is now still there, and it's logged in as user B and remains. And then the user can go about. If they don't need to do anything else other than that, they can finish. And they, if they're a good person, good user, they just tap their badge and they're out. And then we are back to the login screen at that point.
So what application is doing the inactivity log out or disconnects in that scenario?
So that would be a function of the Imprivata agent. There's a policy setting that there's a walkaway security is kind of part of the policy, and you can say, when do you want to start to lock this based on no activity, mouse, keyboard, no function, that type of thing. And so I think by default it's like 5 minutes, but you can drop it down below that or whatever.
So in this case, user taps out, user B walks up. The Citrix session is still active this whole time in the background, or is it not? I'm asking.
Yeah. So the EMR is still attached, the persistent app. If let's say the first user had not just got into the EMR, but also launched that virtual desktop or some other application that was tied to them, that has been disconnected when they log out, or another user is logging in behind them. They say, well, we need to disconnect Chris's virtual desktop because that's not yours. You're Andy, not Chris, but we need to leave the EMR up and running. And just user switch in that application, do a nice clean disconnect of the other applications that are not yours. So does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And then user B does what they do, and then hopefully when they're done, they tap out and they keep plugging along, going to the next room or the next patient. And meanwhile, this constant, really fast world of getting in and out of the apps is happening all over the place. And we're doing this with applications that are hosted on the back end for other speed and security reasons. So you're kind of bringing the best of all of it together.
Yeah. At HIMSS, the demo video, which hopefully please feel free to post it when you put this podcast up. We were running that virtual desktop, Windows 10 in this case, on SSD. So when we connected it, it was extremely fast, which is a beautiful thing. So, the world of VDI in general, as you know, with, converged hyper infrastructure, whatever it's, from about where it was 10 years ago, it's definitely gotten in that speed factor. If you can get that thing up and running rather quickly, whether it's initial login or a reconnect, and it's, let's say 15 seconds or less, hopefully 10 or less, you'll get high fives and doctors and nurses hugging you as you walk the hallways.
Chris, just for clarity, when you say hyperconverged, in this case, SSD, you're talking about the back end.
Correct. Yeah. Where that workspace is coming from. Right. And we all know, obviously, the success that Nutanix has had, for example, in bringing, HCI into the world, and the speed factor and all this other stuff that goes with it. I'm not an expert in that realm, but I certainly saw their growth, and a big part of it was, speed.
Yeah. So that and optimal configuration, profiles using things like FSLogix and Citrix WIM or other vendors' profile management solutions, and getting rid of all the junk. All that stuff still applies.
Yep.
But this is a persistent app. Once it's connected on that device, it's there, and then it's a matter of fast user switching within the application. So,
right, and it could be that that's the only scenario you need for that. But if you need that or option, or you're later on introducing VDI into the customer, I mean, you have that option now because we have this workflow available. So there's a lot of upside. I'll just say that. But the fact is, this is extremely popular workflow, especially of those listening to the podcast. And I hope there's a lot of those. If you were running this workflow on Windows, it was often called, in an Imprivata world, multi-app. I need to get to Epic and other applications. And it's actually a setting in their thing. Very popular way of deploying on Windows shared workstations. Now that has come to IGEL OS. So certainly reach out to our friends, Andy at XenTegra. We'd love to have that conversation with you all and explore and show you how this works.
All right, Chris. Well, I appreciate you putting up with my travel schedule and writing this blog and the stuff you guys were doing at HIMSS last week, and always the references to us. And it's great to see the clinical experience continues to evolve. I kind of want to say this is it, right? It's all there now, and now it's just a matter of implementing it and leveraging. But I'm sure there's more to come.
Oh yeah, there's stuff I cannot talk about, but I will just say this: IGEL is innovating, and we've got some really cool stuff that we were, in some respects, showing at HIMSS, but we couldn't really publicly talk about it. But I'm just telling you, things are coming, and we're going to have fun this year. So,
all right. So keep an eye out.
Keep an eye out.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate the time, and we'll do it again next week with a community edition.
Yes, sir. All right. Take care, man. Have a great day.
There's cooking out of that.